Did Jesus have this problem? Oh no, he went and sat on a boat so that the acoustics were better. Yeah, sorry about that. Welcome, everybody, to the fifth of our lectures in this particular series in 2026. You will, of course, be aware that it is not possible to switch on a news program today without being assailed with more wisdom from the Saviour of the world. No, sorry, got that wrong. Mr. Trump seems to appear in almost everything we do, everything we see, everything we hear. And so we decided in the Theology Group Committee that we would not be left out. And we're very pleased that we have found an expert on Mr. Trump and America and religious communities. Some of you will know, many of you will know, George CONYNE, and we welcome you indeed, George. We're looking forward to hearing how you weave together the two things mentioned on the poster. For those of you who don't know George, after finishing an undergraduate degree in history and a law degree in the United States, George wrote his doctorate in England and came to Canterbury in 1990 to teach history and American studies at the University of Kent. His area of special interest included Anglo-American relations, presumably as they used to be, American civil rights law, and American religious history. Among his responsibilities, he served as chaplain of the Religious Society of Friends, the Quakers. He retired in 2018, and his life in Canterbury continues to be punctuated by trips to the United States for research and work on his lifetime pursuit of trying to understand that constantly changing country. George, welcome. We look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, how's that? That resonates. My gosh, I sound like God in the house of God. It's just too many. Yeah, as I was saying, I knew almost nothing about Trump in early 2015. He seemed to have come out of nowhere to suddenly now, all these years later, all those years, and many more years than we ever thought later, to dominate at least the news, as my introduction said. Who he actually was, of course, was the son of a very successful real estate developer from Queens. That's important because he wasn't the son of a successful real estate developer from Manhattan. Because in New York City, Manhattan is where all the power is. That's where all the money is, and that's the prestige neighborhood. Queens is it's a bit middle class, really. And when you build in Queens, you build solid houses that families live in, but there's no grandeur involved in the thing. And of course, that's absolutely key because Trump is always looking for grandeur. He was the Queens boy who always wanted to go to Manhattan. He saw that as where you make your money. So even from an early age, we have a person who shows the characteristics which I think we can still see, and I suspect you have already seen in the man. His father was successful enough, so he left him a substantial inheritance, and some economists have figured out that if he'd taken that inheritance, put it in a bank in a current account or a savings account, he would now be worth more than he is currently, which I think is a useful perspective. We quickly learned he was the master of tasteless remarks that I'm obviously not going to repeat here. But he and his 3 wives had produced 5 children who were displayed before us in various ways. And he has never held political or military office, so that he really has politically come out of nowhere, something the British system would never allow. He quickly showed that he was a conservative nationalist. He played on the politics of anger, and he clearly played to a populist audience. And that's absolutely critical to understand Trump, that he sees himself as the voice of a part of the American population which feels itself increasingly excluded from what C.P. Snow called the corridors of power, and feel excluded really from the broader trends of modern life, a forgotten section of the society. And he not only sees them that way, they see themselves in that way. And you have to remember that's absolutely vital. His fascination with dictators quickly appeared from what he said, and then during certainly the first administration, what he did. And that was of some concern as to how he saw the world around him. And I think it's very revealing. This is a person who doesn't believe in what is often referred to as soft power, which is the power of things like foreign aid, power that is not direct, not in your face, so to speak, but power that is exerted through establishing a friendship across the world community, which arises from things like students studying in foreign countries, building hospitals for AIDS patients, as George H.W. Bush and then George W. Bush did before him. Those projections of soft power are completely beyond not only what Trump how he sees the world, but very much in line. That attitude is very much in line with his rhetoric. He's very straightforward about these things. That he doesn't believe in essentially reaching across national boundaries to find reconciliation or friendship and so forth. This is a waste of time for him. He still very clearly believes, and has said so on various occasions, that he still sees the world, believes this is the way the world works, which is that the strong take what they want and the weak must suffer as is necessary. Some of you who are about my age and so forth will, if this sounds familiar, of course, in the 1950s, the United States had the horror of Joe McCarthy. And Joe McCarthy, who saw a communist under every bedstead, terrorized the United States for 4 years with his threat of communist accusations in one of the most obscene parts of the Cold War in the United States. His assistant in his crusade against communism of the early 50s was Roy Cohn. You don't need to know anything about Cohn except for the fact, 2 things. One, Cohn then became Trump's lawyer. And it's obvious that he was, in a sense, tutored the young Trump, because Cohn's tactic as a lawyer, and this is famous in New York, the New York bar, was to attack anyone far worse than he had been attacked, was to raise the ante to a level of viciousness that no one would attack him. Sound familiar? He learned well from a master, and Cohn was a master of that tactic. So what's this country he threw himself onto? It's a country which nowadays only about 2/3 of the country calls itself Christian. Much lower than it would have 50 years ago. And of course, we're talking self-description. That almost a much higher percentage 50 years ago would have called themselves Christian. About 45% of the country is Protestant of all varieties, and we know that's a huge umbrella term. Another 20% is Catholic. And again, whenever you talk about these things, you have to be a little suspicious. Catholics, for instance, as they count Catholics, it's anyone who's baptized a Catholic, automatically is considered one for the rest of their lives. And there are plenty of other religions that would never be that expansive. The other great change, in addition to the decline of people identifying themselves as Protestants in the United States, is the decline of people who frankly say that they're non-religious, which when I was a boy would have been a social indiscretion all by itself. In 1970, 10% admitted to pollsters they were non-religious. Most recent polls, 30%. A huge change in a lifetime. Attendance at church, on a weekly attendance at church, is down in the United States over that same period. 28% reported that they had gone to church, they went to church every week in 1970. It's down to 13% now. The people who Trump attracts are scared of that figure, or at least say they are. Evangelicals, and I know that's a very loose term, but I hope you understand generally what I mean. Perhaps 25% of the country calls themselves evangelicals. Many of them in independent churches which deny that they are Protestant, see themselves as a separate third category in the Christian tradition that isn't Catholic and isn't Protestant. So it's very hard to kind of group these things together. And of course, we should note, which Trump usually overlooks, it's about 2% Jewish, and then about 1% Muslim, and 1% Hindu. May not seem like much, but remember, in those cases, we're still talking about, that means 3 million Muslims, about 3 million Hindus, and about 6 to 7 million Jews. The percentages seem small, but remember the numbers we're dealing with in a country of 330, 340 million. Still quite substantial. You look at the breakdown, and of all those groups, the only group, and I'm sorry I have to bring this news to you, ladies and gentlemen, here, the only group that the only large religious group that substantially opposed Trump in the last election were the Episcopalians. About 62, 65% of Episcopalians voted against him. No other large church is anywhere near that. Roughly 50-50 are Northern Baptists, Catholics, Northern Methodists. The rest, like Southern Baptists, evangelicals, anywhere from 2/3 to 5/6 supported Donald Trump. So there's a clear religious division that you can trace through his level of support. Trump's own reaction to supporters is a curious one for someone who has dramatically exceeded expectations, or at least the expectations of 2015. He clearly shows the inability ever to suggest that any of his supporters are not anything other than fine, upstanding people who pay their taxes and contribute to society. Even in the cases where they are proved to be either criminals or scoundrels, and you could make the argument quite reasonably that he would gain more support from independents if he condemned the criminals and the scoundrels. He refuses to do that. And that appeared early. That attitude appeared early. There was a massive rally of the extreme right wing, and I'm talking neo-fascist right wing. I'm not talking about the Conservative Party. I'm talking the really unacceptable face. Large rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. It engendered, as was expected, a counter-demonstration. And one of the right-wing zealots rammed his car into a crowd and killed one of the counter-demonstrators, and it became a national story. President Trump's response, and you can't make this up, there are good people on both sides. You can't reject people who say they support him. And what you immediately begin to realize, what some of the great Mark Shields, the late Mark Shields, said, he's transactional. And this is why his background as a salesman of real estate, from a father who was a salesman of real estate, is so important. He sees every appeal, every incident, every statement of principles as a discrete element of itself. And you have to win each one of those battles. And it doesn't matter, in order to win those confrontations and attempts, whether you contradicted yourself for the last time, whether what you said in the future is demonstrably untrue, as long as you get them on your side. And that's how he operates. He operates, anyone who listens to him at anything, unless he's reading off a teleprompter, which sometimes doesn't control him. But if you listen to him, you can hear the fact that he's improvising. He's saying the first thing that comes into his head. As I said, that's again a classic salesman tactic of reading the audience and playing to whatever they want, regardless of whether it is consistent with basic principles. And so that's Trump. So, as I said, he's always fighting, always looking to sell. I mentioned the fact that he had 3 wives, which is also relevant. His first 2 weddings were held in a great Romanesque revival pile in central Manhattan, built in 1854, called the Marble Collegiate Church, and calls itself, I think, the second longest continuous church congregation in the United States. This has, in the middle of Manhattan, this has prestige written all over it, and that's why Donald Trump was married there twice. He wants the wrappings of prestige. He wants the wrappings of respectability. He just doesn't necessarily want to follow the substance that those wrappings suggest. The minister of that church was the late Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. I'm glad to know I got some reaction. I was very much concerned about that, because an audience like this in the United States, there would be a murmur through the crowd, because everyone knows and remembers who Norman Vincent Peale was. For those of you who are much too young, he was the author of a book called The Power of Positive Thinking. Published in 1952, it was one of the first self-help books in the United States, and one of the most successful. Probably sold since then 5-6 million copies. Sold half that in the first 4 years after it was published. Tremendously successful bestseller. Peale recommended to his readers that they should say 10 times a day, if God is with us, who can be against us? And I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. And the book is that sort of level of complexity of religious thought. about standards through the whole thing. It's a series of kind of slogans to build your self-confidence so that you can then kind of go forth. And to develop confidence, self-respect. Peale states, God is the source of all energy, whatever that means. I'm still trying to figure out what that means, but never mind. And if you look at that book, and I do not recommend this, do not do this at home. Maybe read the Wikipedia article. Don't go any further. And if you take Dr. Peale's religious wording out of the text, you suddenly realize that's Donald Trump. That self-confidence is clearly that, right? That improvisation and self-belief, clearly Trump. As I said, he thinks that things like energy simply exist. It's not from God, they're just simply there. And suddenly you begin to realize where these sorts of attitudes come from. And why, for instance, he is so suspicious of anybody who crosses him. Because they, whether it's the Supreme Court, the United States Congress, or individuals, they are clearly trying to undo his confidence or whatever plans he has, and he knows that he is right. And it doesn't really matter to Trump whether that's God's will. He just assumes that it is a will that will overcome all. And if you look at the record of the last 12 years, I'm sorry to say, he's been remarkably successful in that attitude. God knows what Norman Vincent Peale would have made out of that, but never mind. So this is the can-do spirit that is often attributed to the United States, kind of on steroids, I suppose. That was his first wedding, conducted by Dr. Peale. Second wedding is most remarkable because, we are told, it was nearly postponed because they couldn't come to an agreement on the prenuptial agreement. This was reported widely at the time. If you ever had to demonstrate the attempted commodification of the spiritual, you could never do better than that. And as I said, that's absolutely typical of Trump. You can't marry the woman until you've sorted out your financial arrangements. Right? And so it is with his associates. He's transactional towards them. If they don't do well for him, they're gotten rid of. And one right after another, I can give you a whole list of people who were once his intimates and champions and lawyers. They're just immediately rejected. Because it's all transactional. It's all, as my father used to say, what have you done for me lately? And that continues through as recently as yesterday. There were two sets of primary elections in the United States that are of particular importance to this. In Kentucky, one of his most constant critics from the right wing of the party was defeated by a candidate who wrapped himself in Trump's endorsement, even though the man who had criticized Trump had been a local power in the office for 10 years. And then in the state of Louisiana, Senator John Cassidy lost his bid in the same way. He had voted against Trump, crucially on the second impeachment vote, and Trump never forgave that, and he was defeated, and in fact came in only third place in his party primary. Vengeance is mine, says Trump. But, as I said, he told us that in 2024. He constantly was saying, this is for my retribution, to get even with the people I hate. As I said, that's why I mentioned Roy Cohn and the connection to Joe McCarthy. Because in addition to the influences of Dr. Peel with its Christian background, so too you have the background influencing Trump of Joe McCarthy through Roy Cohn. As you shouldn't be surprised to find this type of personality that sees everything about it himself and sees dealing with the world of a transactional one, Trump is a great lover of the big rally. And sure enough, on Sunday, 3 days ago, on Sunday, we had rededication 250. Now, some of you probably may know, July 4th, the 250th anniversary of the public announcement of the Declaration of Independence. Clearly a secular activity, if there ever was one. Suddenly, we have to engage in a religious act, rededication, to celebrate that, according to this. Rededication 250, a national day of prayer, praise, and thanksgiving. Wrapping this remembrance of a secular event completely in the language of religion from 1776. We're told that thousands went to the National Mall, the kind of American Center Square in Washington, to hear 8.5 hours of speakers. Seems frightening to me, but never mind. Of these, some 20 speakers, there were 17 who would have identified as conservative, fundamentalist Protestant. One Jewish rabbi, one Roman Catholic bishop, but the speakers included, as some of you may have heard, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, and the Vice President, who, of course, lately became a Catholic 10 years ago or so, and has seen fit earlier this year to lecture the Pope on Christian theology. If there was ever an idea that ever spoke for itself, I can't do better than that. Trump addressed this crowd by video. Reporters noticed, however, that it was a video that had already been shown at a prayer breakfast about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So it's a reused video made for this purpose. And the only thing he did was to read 2 Chronicles, starting with chapter 11. And it's worth pondering this, because the 11th verse of the 7th chapter of 2 Chronicles starts with, "Thus Solomon finished the house of the Lord and the king's house. All that Solomon had planned to do in the house of the Lord and his own house, he successfully accomplished. Then the Lord appeared to Solomon in the night and said to him, I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself as a house of sacrifice. When I shut up the heavens so that there is no rain, or command the locusts to devour the land, or send pestilence among the people, if my people are called by my name and humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive them their sin and heal their land. Now my eyes will be open and my ears will be attentive to the prayer that they gave him, and took counsel with the young men that had grown up with him and stood before him. And he said to them, what do you advise me to do? And we shall answer thus. And it kind of goes on in that suggestion of the Lord coming to the aid of those who pray to him, and he's going to send locusts to the ones who don't. Take the principle of the Lord out of that passage, put the principle of Donald Trump in as the power, and you pretty much have the way Donald Trump views the world. That he will hand down the locusts. He will reward the faithful when necessary. No one else need apply, which I took constitutional law a long time ago, but it isn't precisely the way the United States government is structured. But that's the way Trump sees it. And again, he's improvising on the road as the salesman looking to make the sale and convince everyone that he's with them. It's worth noting also that among the other speakers on Sunday's program in Washington were Franklin Graham, the son, you may remember, of the American evangelist Billy Graham, who made such a huge impact in American society during his life. Franklin makes his father look like an agnostic. He said that the United States has become morally rotten, completely sick with sin, and that this is just the tip of the iceberg. To a Trump supporting audience in that rally, who have not in general had good economic times since 2008, that sort of remark makes increasing sense as they see a changing world they simply don't understand. When the lifetime, well-paid, hourly wage job on which you could raise a family at one time, they suddenly realized was with a company that went bankrupt, and suddenly they are with nothing. And there's a lot of that. Much the same as the decline of industry in Great Britain, so too a lot of the middle part of the United States has suffered through economic decline of a similar type. Trump speaks to that crowd. And it doesn't matter that he is not like them in the fact that he's worth something between $2 and $9 billion, depending on who you talk to. He is enunciating their rage. And it almost doesn't matter whether he has $2 billion or $9 billion. I'm reminded of a very distinguished American composer, Charles Ives. One time came out of a concert which was full of worthy people trying to play well and sometimes succeeding. Another concert goer said, pretty awful, wasn't it? Charles Ives looked at the man and said, you know, you were listening to the notes. You missed the music. If you're going to understand Donald Trump, you have to, and why he is popular, you ignore the notes You listen for the music. In other words, the anger. Underneath the remark. It doesn't matter whether the remark is true or false. After all, to the classic salesman, he's going to the next town by the time you can check. I mean, historically, the traveling peddler or salesman, right? And so Trump brings them in because he sees their anger, which he has never himself had anything close to. I mean, his father was not a story of rags to riches. By the time Donald Trump was born, he was already moderately successful, living in a comfortable middle-class house. So it's all Trump's emphasis on this. And if you look at the sort of structure of Dr. Peel's work in The Power of Positive Thinking, if you look at this notion of a God-centric world, but take the God out of it, so that he's at the top of the pyramid rather than God. He admitted yesterday or the day before, he admitted that Jesus was more well-known than he was. I'm sure that was a great reassurance to some people. I have to admit, I personally would have imagined he would not have to say that would be known. But he felt it necessary to assure people that he didn't think that he was more popular than Jesus, or at least better known. Mainstream Protestant America sees this and largely cannot sort of abide with him on it. Catholic America is, as those numbers that I quoted at the beginning, is deeply divided. I have a lifetime friend of mine who is a doctor and therefore not stupid. And he's a good doctor, I know that. But he one time shook his head with me and he said, if Trump would just shut up. And again, the notion that you pay attention to what he does, not the rhetoric, the Catholic beliefs, that old Catholic nostrum, hate the sin, love the sinner, which that represents. And I'll tell you, that friend of mine thinks that the Catholic Church is too conservative. So his family joined a Ukrainian Catholic congregation. Conservative Protestants love the anger. Nothing really to do with their spiritual values, like the anger that expresses their outrage in the way they see their own marginalization in society, whether that's spiritual justification or the way they've been marginalized materially. Because, and you can, these statistics are all over the place, you can see that certainly since 1980, in the United States, the rich have gotten richer far faster than any other part of society. There is this widening gap. Those gaps, which roughly from 1930 to 1980, roughly held steady in society, suddenly, for the first time in 100 years, have suddenly divided dramatically. And of course, these people are reflecting a longer, a more distinguished tradition. Because they see Trump as an ally to get what they want. And I may remind you that in 1179, at the Third Lateran Council, passed a canon which said that Christians should not employ Muslims or deal with Muslims, suggesting that practice was so common in 11th century Europe that it had to be banned. Specifically noting, by the way, the south of France, as a particular area where Muslims are being treated kindly and working with those in society. And of course, southern France is right across the border from Spain, and the history of medieval Spain is overwhelmingly, after the Reconquista, is overwhelmingly three religions getting along remarkably well in comparison to the rest of Europe. So, but of course, with violence as well, not widely known that the great Catholic crusader of this time, El Cid, actually also fought for Muslim sultans as well as Christian potentates. That he was a soldier for fortune, a man of hire, not a man of God in that sense. But Alfonso X of Spain can say that he ruled over three peoples peacefully in the 13th century, and Francis I of France signed a treaty in 1536 with the Ottoman Empire for mutual alliance and protection. The Holy Roman Emperor was outraged that the King of France, His Most Christian Majesty, should make an alliance with the Muslims. And even more recently, in the Crimean War, Britain and France, supporting the Turks, oppose the Russians in the Crimea. And finally, the most obvious example is the two English-speaking powers joined with the Soviet Union in the Second World War. In other words, there's a long history of Christians making common cause, working in alliance with non-Christians in order to achieve their original purpose and goal. You can see Trump's supporters of faith in very much the same light. Going back to what I said, from Catholic doctrine, they can justify it by saying that they hate the sin, but they love the sinner because we must do that as pious Christians. That, it seems to me, if you want to get started to ask the other half of the question, which is not what does Trump make of American religion, but what does American religion make of Trump, that, it seems to me, is the place to start. You have to look at it that conservative Christians who tend to support him in large numbers think that he will be their champion for enough of their causes to justify turning a blind eye to all those elements that is just, of course, catnip and gold bars to a news media that increasingly, because of the changing nature of news media, is desperate to get your attention or your money, because increasingly they have no idea whether that type of media will even be in existence in 2 or 3 years' time. So they're desperate to get your attention. And Trump, of course, is a machine to produce eminently quotable, even in horror, eminently quotable items that newspapers take up. But in a sense, he has been successful, so successful, because he has understood that really since 2008, a vast part of the country in the United States isn't doing as well as they used to. And always believed that the United States was a country where every year things got better economically than the year before. And that simply has not been true for a large part, 50% of the American population, roughly. There are lots of ways of measuring this. They're frightened not only of the economic changes in the world and in the United States, But of course, they're frightened about changes in matters of faith as well. And they don't really particularly distinguish between those two areas. They are intertwined. I worked with a man in Mississippi who casually said to me that, no, in fact, this was a Thursday, he said, I've only been to the church 4 times this week. And it was because it was typical for him, not a minister, it was typical for him to go to the church every day during the course of his life. So for him and men like him, that distinction isn't there. The two are, as my introduction said, interwoven with each other. And so if you want to understand why Trump has it, you start with those principles, and very quickly you get the measure of the man. Thank you. I must apologize, by the way, for that delivery. I have never had a trouble with, well, in fact, I usually have trouble in the other direction, that my mouth produces too much liquid. Right now, I have the driest mouth I have literally never, ever had in my life. And so I'm sorry if it got in the way of my delivery. Take another drink.
I think we got the message. George, thank you so much for that. It's time for questions, time for comment, time for ideas.
Again, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Can you tell us something about J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio? Would you see these as the possible successors should anything sadly happen to Trump?
You started that question saying, can you tell us, or can you say something? How many hours do you have, sir? Yeah, I've followed the careers of these two remarkable individuals. That's a safe term. Vance, to me, is... I've just, not terribly long ago, was in an airplane. And as we all know, the great fascination with airplane technology is the famous black box that records everything in the airplane. So as it crashes, they find the black box. Vance is a black box to me. I have no idea what the reality is. This is a man who successfully disguised his writing to say, more or less, that he was a hillbilly in the Hillbilly Elegy, the bestseller that he wrote. He graduated from Yale Law School, the most distinguished law school in the United States. To say he's just a hillbilly is to suggest that the Duke of Marlborough is a farmer. I mean, come now, pull the other one that's got bells on it. And of course, he has shown himself, since he became a national figure, that he will say anything that Donald Trump wants him to say. And you can be sure that anything the vice president says has been cleared by the White House. So, you're seeing the equivalent of the ventriloquist dummy while he's being... This is not a Starmer-Rayner relationship. Oh, no. No, he is just doing that. Now, of course, the question immediately is, if you give him power, if you go from number 2 to number, what happens? And some people argue, of course, that what will happen is we will see the true voice of moderate conservatism, an attitude which he has taken previously in his career in order to get himself elected senator from Ohio. A difficult state to win because tremendous variety of opinions, even by American standards. And, you know, right? You don't, but as I said, my reaction is he's still the black box. I have no idea what the real, no one is ever sure what the courtier would say when the king dies. And that, it seems to me, is what's really important about Vance. Marco Rubio strikes me as a young man in a hurry, who is now approaching middle age and still trying to figure out where he's hurrying to and how to get there, because he's not at all sure. Famously, he excoriated Trump in 2015, 2016, only to then make peace with Trump. Well, of course, Trump knows how to deal with people like that. You use them until you get rid of them. And if you need to get rid of them, you say he was never one of us, and he was a latecomer, and I tried to be kind to him, and he bit my hand, so I get rid of him, and no one's going to pay any attention to him at all. So on one hand, you got a black box. On another hand, you got a man who I think really is searching, is still feeling his way along, and doesn't really understand, really isn't self-confident about the nature of the political scape. I think, honestly, that the Republican Party is ripe for somebody who's not associated with Trump, that you haven't heard of right now, to make a good impression on the public and leave those two in the dust. But I don't bet. I am trained in law and history, two worlds that look backwards, and I always find myself in trouble when I try to predict the future. What do I make of
Paula White?
Yes, I could have gone in. There were ways I could deal with Paula White. But you got, I mean, I could also talk on the subject for several more hours. She is, to my mind, another person attracted by extreme views, which may be honest. I mean, I'm not saying she's necessarily a liar, but then hooks herself to Trump's star that she figures is going to help her future. Much like with Vance, she's kind of in a national celebrity sense, she's almost a product of Trump. And so I don't know what the reality is if that centerpiece disappears. What will she be like when he finally goes into retirement? I don't know. And I'm not sure in her case. I mean, Vance of course, has won political office, has shown himself some success outside of the Trump sphere. I don't know whether she would even be able to be there on the national celebrity spectrum without Trump. So it's as I said, I mean, and there have been times in history when, almost in all countries, where you kind of skip the sense that everything is performative. And we're in that sort of an age now. I can remember years ago when I was a graduate student, I got into a lengthy argument with a very good friend of mine about the old style versus substance argument that we've all known about. And I, of course, it was I was arguing about the importance of supporting substance. You've got to keep society going. And he said, no, it's all style. Well, in 1985, there could be an argument that way. We're living in such an age of style right now, with so little substance, that I wouldn't even have that argument anymore. I would just give up on my position and go do something else. I don't know. I'm reading a biography of Charles V right now. That makes much more sense to me.
My brother, who has lived and worked in New York, and has actually got American nationality for the past 50 years, thinks that when we get to the midterm elections, there's going to be a massive vote against Trump in Congress. Would you agree with that? And if so, what would Trump's response be to a massive electoral rejection of the president? Something we're a little bit familiar with, I think, recently.
Well, first off, whatever if it is a negative vote, Trump will find somebody else to blame. Oh, no, Trump never is, in that sense, wrong. He never admits a weakness or sin. After all, again, Norman Vincent Peale, power of positive thinking. He's moving forward. He's looking at the future, right? And so he doesn't have time to admit a mistake. And I think those of you who have a detailed knowledge of American politics will remember that when President Clinton's party, Democrats, lost control of Congress, we began what we heard was triangulation, was the magic word of the day. I think Trump on a dime would change and go out and work with what Democrats he could find to pass his, how to put it as gently as I can, to pass the emaciated lists of real serious proposals that he wants to have Congress pass in the first place. And you look at the record, even though they're Congress friendly to him, they still don't do much. They don't pass a vast quantity of legislation. This is one of the least productive Congresses, just in terms of numbers of bill passed, which is a kind of rough idea. Just the number of, in 20th century, 21st century American history. So he would be, I think, content with that sort of inertia. And of course, conservatives historically don't want an activist government. So it plays right into his position if it's an inactive government between 2027 and 2029. Yes, and to get to the first part of your question, yes, all the indications is that there is a tsunami out there about to hit the landscape of revulsion against Trump. But some of you are old enough to remember a politician of some renown in this country, whose name we almost don't mention anymore, Harold Wilson. Remember him? A week is a long time in politics. And of course, whenever he said that, 1965, thereabouts, if a week seemed a long time in terms of news media and so forth, now, what would you say? 12 hours is a long time in politics by what you feel, how you feel things are changing in 2026. So I am very hesitant, particularly after what I just said, about my inability to predict the future. But yes, if we had dear old Peter Snow standing in front of his device, right? The swingometer. Yeah, right now, all the indication are that the Democrats have a 12, 13-point swing in their favor. I won't go into all the details. I'll be happy to discuss them with the people who want that. But right now, it looks as if it's a 12, 13-point swing. If that happens, yes, there's going to be a lot of unemployed Republican congressmen. And it's going to be a whacking great Democratic majority. And Trump will work with it. I have utterly no doubt he'll change that. It may surprise some of you to know that on the guest list of his second wedding, I've never talked about weddings this much in my life, on the guest list of his second wedding were Bill and Hillary Clinton. And there are photographs in the reception of the groom talking quite amiably. You can tell they're being friendly with each other. There's no false put on. You know, and that's Trump. And that's the salesman, right? And that's the salesman who never denies anyone, even if the person is a crook. He wants something from them. So yeah, he'll work. He'll change. Completely forget that he said he was dealing with traitors. And it's the word he often has used now. Just a year before. So.
You have told us at great length that Trump is
dear.
a narcissist and power mad and one or two other things. I think it only fair to point out that he doesn't seem, unlike Putin and others in, for example, Iran, he does not seem keen on killing people and does in fact do everything he can to avoid it. Would you agree, therefore, that he has some good qualities?
I wouldn't have said that his actions over the last 3 months in Iran indicate that he wants to avoid killing people. When, as some of you know, apparently Iranian media has been full of the death of its estimated, I think, 170 school children in a school that happened to be near some sort of military target in Iran. And of course, the American military is very proud of these bombs that are supposed to be able to go down an assigned chimney in a factory complex, and they killed 180 school children. And I gather that's relatively well attested. So, yeah, I mean, we've heard the rhetoric, and I understand that, the rhetoric of not killing people. I think the reality in that case is very dubious, given, as a subsidiary example, the way families have been torn apart over his immigration policy. So, as a kind of indifference to life and the quality thereof. So I don't see him being any more peaceful, or to be honest with you, non-peaceful than lots of other people in society. I don't think that his interest in killing or avoiding death is that much different than lots and lots of other politicians, although he tries to argue it is. I'm sorry, does that answer your question? Free country.
I've been living and working full-time in northern Nigeria for the last 10 years, where Trump's recent military action includes dropping bombs on Christmas Day and bombs in the northeast of Nigeria in Borno State just last month. His actions seem to be based on a wrong understanding of what's happening in this area of Nigeria. And his interventions are not helping, but endangering lives and aggravating the situation. Have you any comments on his international policies in this area?
From a man who publicly thought we needed to support or be supportive of the work of the great civil rights leader Frederick Douglass, who he clearly used in the present tense, when Douglass died in 1895, the fact that he doesn't understand what I think you'll agree is the notorious complex politics of ethnic relations and ethnic politics in Nigeria, that he doesn't have any understanding of that. It doesn't come as a surprise, shall we say, that he doesn't understand the meaning of either the difference between attitudes in Nigeria, the staggering, I talk about the increasing level of division of wealth in the United States. I mean, Nigeria makes that division of wealth look tiny in comparison to the division of wealth across the whole society. So I'm not at all surprised that he doesn't understand, and that he is then he's shown himself to be perfectly willing to ignore those sorts of difficult areas that he doesn't have really very much interest in. And northern Nigeria would be high on that list of places he's not very interested in. And so he simply dismisses. So no, I'm not surprised at all. And I've followed that world a little bit with all of the outrages committed in northern Nigeria, especially against women and girls. And that's the sort of thing that leaves him completely uninterested. Women's rights is a kind of closed book to Donald Trump.
Thank you. I remember, and you may remember this, George, the last time you spoke, or one time in the Quakers, and I must say, you surprised me and impressed me then very much, and I'm wondering if you may do the same tonight, which you already have to some degree, of course. But my question is, relative to that first answer you gave some years ago now, when Trump was in his first presidency. Now I'm wondering if you think he might stand again, and don't worry about the Constitution, because I'm sure he's capable of changing lots of things, possibly including the Constitution. So my question is, do you think he will stand again? And and if he's fiddling around with the Constitution, would he also award himself the Nobel Peace Prize?
I probably am naive in this regard, but I think that the Swedish committee and the Swedish intellectuals responsible for the Peace Prize are probably far enough away to avoid the poisoning of the Trump effect. So to make your last point, no, I don't think he's going to get the Nobel Peace Prize. To the second point, which is changing the Constitution, no, I am still, and again, I may be naive and old-fashioned enough that no, he can't change the Constitution for that purpose. It's too complex a task. It's almost impossible now to change it for 2028. And the last time there was something that affected the presidency, the way in which the constitutional amendment was written, it specifically excluded the incumbent. It's from all presidents in the future, not the president of the day. So no, I don't think he can change the Constitution. Totally apart from that, I think, once again, if you look at what is both happening and what he is doing, I think he realizes that January 2029 is going to be time to go home. He is not doing anything to build a candidacy for that time. And lots of politicians do. I mean, it's now been, Jimmy Carter announced the presidency in December of 1974 for the election that was held in November 1976. And that was 50 years ago. Again, as you can understand, the way things go, anyone who's seriously thinking about 2028 is already building a pile to fight that election. And we have an example. Vice President Vance apparently is on the telephone every day raising money. All the reports are he is single-mindedly interested in running. And Trump isn't doing that. And of course, if you immediately say, yes, but he's worth $2 to $9 billion, Trump has never spent his own money. In his development projects, as a real estate developer, as a presidential candidate, he borrows or is given money. Deutsche Bank in New York City was one of his favorite banks. They gave him huge amounts of money, and he was playing with their money when he engaged in his development projects in that city, just to take one example. So, since he only wants to play with somebody else's money, and he's not raising money, and his vice president is, those are generally signs that he's not running. So, I don't think he's going to run. I don't think he can change the Constitution. And I don't think that the Nobel Committee is going to be particularly concerned with his nomination. And someone will nominate him. I have no doubt about that, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Don't you think democracies are having difficulty negotiating with totalitarian states?
Yes, but then democracies...
Any possible solutions?
No, I'm afraid I don't, because as I was just about to say, democracies have always had difficulties dealing with totalitarian states. I don't know, in fact, it is almost inherent in the nature of democracy that there is going to be difficult, because democracy always implies a multitude of voices that have legitimacy. And in a dictatorial state, you never have to worry about them. There's only one voice that counts. So it's a weakness of democracy in that sense. I personally say, thank heavens and amen that it's there. Sir.
Thanks for your glowing tribute to Mr. Trump and his administration. Do you have any thoughts on the Democrats?
Oh, another one of these 5-hour answers. Dear me. A name that nobody remembers anymore was the great American humorist Will Rogers, who famously would say, "I'm a member of no organized political party, I'm a Democrat." And although he said that in about 1925, some things don't change. The Democrats carve each other up endlessly, and sometimes they manage to come together for just long enough, once every 4 years, to actually win an election. So I have confidence that although it seems like a hopeless case right now of a leaderless group of people who aren't even part of a coherent movement, the Democrats, they will come together slowly and largely on the basis of this week's latest number that I could have used in my previous answer, which is that Trump's popularity rating is at 38% and has never been that low before. The Democrats will begin to say, it's our year. We'd better pull together to make sure we don't mess this one up as bad as we messed up 2024. I'm a historian, but I don't think you need to be a historian to remember what happened in 2024. Right? So I have guarded optimism that the Democrats will get their rules. The problem, as you also know, just generally is that getting elected because you're against something almost always leads to problems if you are then responsible for doing something when you've only been elected because you were against something. So although the Democrats might actually win, this might be, now's when the real problem starts. You remember, black and white films, romantic comedy is always finished with the bride and the groom at the altar after 2 hours of problems, right? And of course, you all know what the comment is. Now their problems really begin. Well, that'll be the Democrats. The Democrats will be in the problem of the dog who's caught the car and doesn't know what to do with it as a collective. But again, I think that even more than my comment about that a fresh face on the Republican side, I think would probably be a plus for the Republicans. I think that's true for the Democrats, and the Democrats are more likely to go down that route of nominating a name completely unknown to you right now, but of course becomes a very successful politician. And my exhibit A for that principle is Barack Obama. How many people in Britain knew who Barack Obama was? You know, what it would be now would be 2.5 years before the election. Not a lot. Not a lot.
Thank you so much. I found that absolutely fascinating, terrifying, because it made me think that not a lot has changed in some aspects of the United States since Huckleberry Finn. And
How lot has changed in the United States?
Since Huckleberry Finn. A lot of what you described was like reading Huckleberry Finn.
Gosh, you are old, aren't you? Yeah.
Well, if you say you're the Dauphin and you act like the Dauphin, who's going to check? And I think we kind of would, what I'd like to ask you specifically about, because this rarely gets touched on, because then I was feeling quite smug and thinking, oh, well, it's not like that here. We've got the BBC and the pluralist media. But Donald Trump is still presented as, his main credentials for being a statesman is that he's a fantastic businessman. He's successful. He masters the art of the deal. The fact that he has done no better financially than I have, because I put 50 quid in the bank, I could have done the same thing. That was astounding to me, because he is presented as an archetype of a successful person in our media. The BBC never says Donald Trump, the great deal maker, but by the way, he hasn't made any more money on his savings bonds than you or I would have done. So I was really interested in that and kind of fact check. Where does that come from? And why do we not know that more? Why is he still presented as this amazing entrepreneur? Thank you.
The short answer to your question is, why does he say all those things? Why does he do all those things? He believes them. And critics of Dr. Peel's book, Power of Positive Thinking, have in fact called it a case of self-hypnosis. That if you say those things like, God is on my side, people can't stop me, I have the power to sell 1,000 refrigerators or drive across the United States or whatever, right? That you begin to believe it regardless of what the truth is around you. And Trump, it seems to me, is a very clear example of that, who, because he's always had enough money, can create in his own mind the world the way he wants to see it, that there is enough truth out there, or what one American comedian and commentator calls truthiness, rather than truth, which sounds as if it could be true, but you're not entirely sure. There's enough truthiness out there for him to convince himself, and then, of course, and you all know this problem, he can always hire courtiers who will be more than happy to tell him what he wants to hear over and over again. To my mind, a perfect example of this, with horrific consequences, is Venezuela. You can go in there and change all of Venezuelan life by removing the leader. And when that seemed to sort of work because he removed the leader without much difficulty, we won't even get to the question of whether that makes any difference in Venezuelan society. Never mind. I can go on that subject for some while. The real horror was that he thought Iran was going to be the same. And so now we've had this horror in various ways in Iran. I wouldn't need to deal with that, and it's obvious. But that's because somebody convinced him that Iran was just Venezuela too. You know, Venezuela, that was with a better grade of oil than Venezuela. The two were basically the same. And a lot of people, of course, think about foreign relations in those terms. That you can just interchange relations between countries, and that what worked on one side of the globe will work on the next side of the globe. Lots of people, whether they're powerful or novice, they make those beliefs. So.
George, I want to thank you on behalf of all of us very much indeed. Many of us on this side of the pond have been deeply perplexed why so many Americans and so many American Christians are attracted to Donald Trump. And you've helped this evening to explain that to us. I think one of the things I shall take away from your talk is I realize that here we tend to listen to Donald Trump's rhetoric and make judgments on that basis. In other words, we're listening to the notes and not to the music. And what you've helped me see is that for many people in America, for some Christians in America, it's the music that he's speaking to, the notes you can almost ignore. But I'm also very grateful because I've been deeply perplexed by Donald Trump himself, and by talking to us about how this son of a salesman ticks, you've enabled me to get some sense of why the man behaves as he does. It can't have been an easy talk to prepare. You said to me a couple of weeks ago that what really worried you was that in this volatile world, with a volatile president, something might happen that could affect everything you'd planned to say tonight. It's also not been an easy talk to prepare because I, for one, was quite worried, more than quite worried, when I heard on Sunday that you were stranded in an airport, I believe, in Mexico. I'm very glad you got here. I'm aware you're probably still jet-lagged, so thank you so much for giving us such a good talk after such a difficult experience, because I'm glad above all to have heard the talk you gave us tonight. George, thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you for those very kind words, but I'll tell you, and of course, I wasn't stuck in an airport precisely. I, of course, was stuck in a hotel next to the airport, and that is a perfect place of silence that allows you to contemplate writing a lecture. It was probably a much better place in which to write a lecture than my own apartment. So you remember that. And I am very grateful to the audience, and to show my grateful thanks to the audience, if there are any church wardens or people who are involved in the running of this magnificent space, I can assure you, if you have a fund to get the clock running, I will contribute.
all evening. It is miraculous when it tells the right time. Just one or two notices before you leave. In the email I sent round announcing this meeting, I mentioned that Richard Llewellyn, who's sent out emails about our meetings for many years, has asked to be relieved of this job. We're incredibly grateful to Richard, and I'm very pleased to be able to tell you that he's recovering well after his latest knee operation. Richard characteristically tells us that sending out the emails is not a heavy responsibility. We need someone to take over that job from him. It isn't a heavy responsibility. It means sending out 7 emails a year and keeping the mailing list up to date when people say they've moved away and no longer want to be on it. Richard would be very happy to explain to any potential successors exactly how he does it. We're also hoping that for next year we will have got a specific contemporary theology group email so that you wouldn't need to use your own email address to do it. So please, 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 if you're willing to take this job on, or if you'd like to find out a bit more before committing yourself, please have a word with me afterwards or email me. And while we're talking about emails, my usual announcement, if you're not on our email list and would like to be, there's a piece of paper on the table in the lobby on which you can put your name and your email address. We meet next for our final meeting of this year on Wednesday, the 17th of June. I've been involved in this group, I realize, for getting on for 30 years since Mike Walling set it up. And I don't think in all that time we've ever had a talk on money. So we are redressing that imbalance next time. Our speaker, John Daniels, who's an Anglican priest, writer, and theological educator, will be talking on the subject, money, where it comes from, where it's going, and why it's all about faith. So I shall look forward to seeing many of you then.
It's all right.
I get some wonderful mailings from a man called Robert Reich.
Yeah.
Super stuff. It was Professor Richard Norman. I didn't really know Rick Norman.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Of course you were, your colleague. It was he who casually mentioned him to me a long time ago, and I'm very glad he did.
Yeah.
Because I like the stuff he's a very encouraging sort of guy.
Oh, yeah.
And he seems to get to the truth of things. Would you agree?
Well, I mean, he is, of course, a veteran of the Clinton administration and has that view. I largely agree with many things, and he's obviously a very brilliant man. I'm sure you know the other remarkable characteristic of Robert Reich.
He's very short.
I was going to say he's very short,
Tiny man.
under 5 foot.
I know that.
Yeah, but he's an impressive thinker, but he's a predictable one. You know what the line's going to be because it is so solidly what Bill Clinton's line was.
Oh, I see.
Now he may have said that he was locked in the cabinet, but which is the name of his book, but I don't think that he. I don't think he. I mean, and yeah, he obviously is more left-wing and would have gone a lot farther than Clinton had he had his chances. But of course, Reich knows, which is the reason why he didn't resign, that politics is politics, and you're never going to get everything, you know. Dwight Eisenhower said that he was giving orders. He was used to having things done. He said, in politics, you're lucky if you get 1 out of 3 done.
Okay.
You know.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Oh, I'm just getting rid of this. Walk out with
So
it.
the world has heard our
Yeah.
conversation.
Thank you. That was a very interesting talk.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah.